So without further ado, let me introduce your presenter for today. Dr. Cyan Cooper is an adjunct graduate professor at Touro College in New York City. He's been a counselor, a teacher, an administrator, and an elementary and high school principal, specialist in early childhood, and even more than that. His focuses and successes have been as a turnaround specialist, one who assesses what's right and what's not for individual students. He creates programs to fill gaps and help students, whether age 6 or 16, believe they have a future worth working toward. So we can't wait to hear what you have to share, Dr. Cooper. I will turn it over to you.
Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Trudy, for that beautiful introduction. As Trudy mentioned, this is an opportunity for us to leverage MTSS practices with the level of intentionality to really ensure that we're creating equitable opportunities and, most importantly, that sense of belonging. So I know we've gotten started and we've done a welcome to all of our participants. I know that we have people from all over, from different parts of New York. If you can kindly put those places in the chat so that you have an opportunity to just really represent your city, your town, your state. And in some cases, land acknowledgements have become very popular for the indigenous people that have been on the spaces that we are currently occupying. So we always want to make sure that we can own our space and really relish the opportunity to find value in all that we bring. Moving forward, there's a presentation overview. Really important in this topic is critically reflecting on MTSS design that will intentionally leverage our opportunities. We want to also ensure that we have opportunities to plan and promote equity across all 3 tiers with MTSS. We also want to ensure that we review the data-based decision-making on how to plan, deliver, assess universal targeted and intensive intervention practices. And lastly, we're going to work at creating a shared vision of school culture, really reinforcing that sense of equity and sense of belonging. So we have a few objectives that I want to run through with you all. These objectives, here we go, are really to help us understand the key components of MTSS, as well as learn questioning techniques and strategies for identifying and addressing barriers in our process. We want to develop skills of implementing data-driven decisions and making this process within MTSS one that we are willing to take risks. So in taking those risks, we're also going to explore practices for collaborating with our partners. As we move forward, I want you to take an opportunity to go with me to our value barometer. Our value barometer is coming from, we have a quote, which is coming from the late president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. What I'll ask for you to do is to respond in the chat with whether you agree, disagree, or feel neutral about the statement. The statement coming from the late president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, reads the following: "It is not beyond our power to create a world in which all children have access to a good education." And I'll read it again. "It is not beyond our power to create a world in which all children have access to a good education." If you can kindly respond in the chat, whether you agree, disagree, or feel neutral about this statement. Please and thank you. I see mostly ones. And this is really important in our process as we engage in this content. This really helps us to understand our why. Why do we do what we do? Is definitely rooted in self-efficacy and is often associated with the social cognitive theory, particularly the work of Albert Bandura. Bandura's social cognitive theory really emphasizes the role of self-efficacy in human motivation, learning, and behavior. That sense of belief that we have in this statement will transition into the practices that we have as we engage with each other, as well as engaging with all members of our community. One thing I want to emphasize in this process is that self-efficacy is really referring to that individual's belief in the ability for our students to be successful. We have to be able to embody that belief and transfer that belief into actionable items across our MTSS program in an equitable manner. So I want you to keep this why statement in your mind as we are going through each slide. I want you to think about your why you do what you do in the capacity in which you serve, whether you are a superintendent, assistant, coordinator, director, teacher. Keep your why at the forefront of this particular session. Thank you. Moving forward, our agenda is going to allow us to really think a little bit deeply. Do we really know what we think we know? We're going to examine our unconscious bias and redefine MTSS terminologies. We're going to be able to engage in big thought questions to remove those biases and barriers. We're going to question our own thinking and take risks to implement equitable practices. We're going to decide whether making a decision is based on our intellect or our feelings. We're going to use data to question our own beliefs and support equitable decision making. And lastly, we're going to partner with stakeholders to create a shared vision of equitable practices. So again, remember, do you really know what you think you know? That's your why. And we're going to unpack this in our session to empower educators, to streamline systems, and to support students. Now, what I would like for you to do in our warm-up activity is take another moment. We're headed back to the chat. And I want you to describe some of the words that come to your mind when you think of tiers of MTSS. What are some of the words that come to your mind when you think of tiers of MTSS? I'm seeing some great things in the chat. Eagles most need the most help to soar. I'm seeing all-in-one, small group targeted intervention, additional support, love as we move up the triangle, individual instruction, support directed, supporting learners, tier 2, supporting learners more targetedly, specific targeted support. These are all great words that we are associating with the various levels. One thing we want to emphasize in this particular area is that we're looking at words that denote process as well as product terminologies. So when we think of process, we're thinking about the path that we take, and when we think of product, we're considering the outcome. So in this session, we're going to look at the terms that are being used and our ability to operationalize these terms in MTSS systems. We're going to ask ourselves, is my language focused on the process of learning or the outcome of learning? It brings to mind thinking and questioning our practice and how we engage in planning and delivery of the social constructs that set the tone for learning and academic engagement. And so we're setting the tone based on the terminologies that we associate with our MTSS practice in denoting whether it is process-oriented or whether it's product-oriented. Am I supporting the students along the path, or am I just focused on the outcome? Today, in this process, I want you to note that this image is the defining image of our presentation. This image is exemplifying where we're going to start and where we're going to end up. It's the process as well as the product. However, we're defining terminologies. We're going to analyze our own thinking. We're going to evaluate and reflect on our process for improvement. And this is where student voice is deeply embedded. The why. We want to advocate for student voice through feedback loops by providing them a set of opportunities to participate in the table of planning. Remember, we are planning with and for our students. So we have a pop quiz. Are you ready? What is the most comprehensive description of MTSS? A, tiered systems to prevent students from acting out. B, tiered systems to support improvement of academic skills. C, tiered systems of both academic and behavioral support. If you chose C, you are correct. You are on the path of success, and we'll be moving forward with our terminology unpacking. I want you to think back to the words that came to mind that you've placed in the chat when we were asking about associated terminology with MTSS. You may want to use this resource throughout the presentation. You can use this resource as a reference even after the presentation, but it houses the terminologies that are commonly used within MTSS. These are the popular buzzwords, if you will. You have access to this. You can look at it at your leisure and associate these terminologies with the practice that we'll be unpacking today. Okay, now it's time for another pop quiz. What are the most common reasons that teachers do not get the expected results from an evidence-based reading program? Is it A, implementation of MTSS? Is it B, student behavior problems? Or is it C, fidelity of implementation? If you've chosen C, you are correct. Fidelity of implementation is referring to the extent to which the program or intervention is implemented as intended. Are we following the program? Are we making the necessary adjustments to ensure that the program is making sense to be individualized towards supporting the student's needs, both academically, socially, as well as developmentally? All right, now we're going to define MTSS, and we're going to focus on the comprehensive framework, which is encompassing academic behavior and social support systems that utilize data to effectively coordinate various resources for students. We're focusing on the design that is implemented to address all student needs across programs, and we're going to rely on some data to prioritize prevention and employ evidence-based practices. This terminology is important because it's process-oriented and it's inclusive, and it's not a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. It's a cyclical process, which implies that every person's voice matters in the process, and you have to ask yourself, as well as others in your learning community, are all members present, and who are we missing when we're defining these terms? Are all members present, and who are we missing? Now, remember I told you that MTSS is a process. We know that in this process, there are systems. These systems are goal-oriented and problem-solving approaches that integrates tools and theories and methods and various domains to ensure that the journey along for MTSS is encompassing all programmatic aspects. Most oftentimes, there is the adherence to policies and the rollout of programs, and you're trying your best to implement as much as possible. But the ability to do this can be daunting because there's so many different pieces. When we look at all of the systems that are a part of this process, I want you to be considering looking at this from a departmental perspective, that there are teams of individuals that are here as experts to support their lane in the work that you do every single day. So we're going to lean on the other departments and the other systems for support so that our students get the most optimal experience in their journey in all three tiers. Now let's take a look at the terminology equity. Equity is about opportunity, access, resource allocation, and culture. This translates to a deep examination of often long-held practices and beliefs about who should, who can, and who will succeed in our schools. These are the questions that I want you to consider asking yourself as you begin to think about the planning stages of your MTSS. Who are our students? Who has access? Who does not have access? Who are we forgetting? How do we increase access? Are we fully utilizing our resources? Who do we assume have access and why? Who don't we assume have access and why? Think about our warm-up activity earlier. What were your response? You may have asked, who did you have? You may have had someone in mind. And why did you have a particular person in mind when we thought about that warm-up activity in association with those tones? What can you do differently to consider every student having an opportunity is also really important. So now when we define equity in education, we're looking at it from the perspective of each child having access to the relevant and challenging academic experiences and educational resources necessary for success across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, family background, and or income. There's reference information available for you that you can unpack educational equity. And there's some principal elements that are important in this process. Equal access to quality education, inclusive education. We consider closing the gap. We consider culturally responsive teaching, equitable distribution of resources, and we want to ensure that there's a strong foundation from early childhood. We also want to ensure that there's developmental processes in place for social and emotional learning and community engagement and partnership. And lastly, advocacy for all that we do. Now, in defining equity-based MTSS, I would like for you to take a moment to reflect on this definition. I would like for you to read it and then let us know in the chat what words resonate with you and why. Positive benefits. All students. Dynamic and timely fashion. Complex, data-informed framework. When thinking about the words that best resonate with you, I want to remind you to consider the process-oriented nature as well as the product-oriented nature of the language that we're using so that we can guide ourselves through an equitable process. Now it's time for us to operationalize equity. What do you mean when we say equity-based MTSS? When we talk about community, we're ensuring that everyone has an opportunity. When we're talking about voice and access, we're talking about teaching and learning that's fluid. When we talk about resources are matched to each student's need, we're ensuring that we have the resources to allocate to our students and families. When we talk about giving a sense of belonging, we're considering every aspect of culture that a student brings to the experience of learning. The image that you'll see next is an image that portrays our many different versions of the assumptions that we demystify in defining equity versus equality. When we look at the image, we see equality being, more about equal, referring to the idea of the same resources. When we think about the implementation of educational equality, we're thinking about the system that is in place for everyone and that everyone is following this curricula, so to speak. However, when we think about equity, it sort of gets into the practice of our differentiation of instruction when we consider the universal design elements of learning and that all students have an opportunity to engage in the instructional experience according to their needs. So below the two images above, you have variations of how equity is presented in the classroom. We're looking at different stations. We're looking at students sitting. We're looking at students standing. We're looking at a variety of different resources that are available to students in the same exact setting. This is the foundation of what we should hear, see, and experience in classrooms when we close our eyes and think about equity. We're thinking about an experience that allows all students to feel a part of the classroom and begin to experience that sense of belonging. There's no isolated experience in the experience of equity. There's only individualization to support the student's needs. Now, what is educational equity? Who has access? Who is or who is not represented and why? What is the level of engagement from students and staff? Is the participation inclusive of key stakeholders? What are the results of our actions? This is what we're thinking about. We're thinking about an opportunity to gain 360 feedback so that we have a full circle of constituents providing an understanding of their experience in the practices that we define as equity. When educational policies, practices, and interactions and resources are representative of the constructed body, we're looking to ensure that there's access, representation, meaningful participation, and high outcomes. So what's more important in our equitable experiences is that we're taking the journey as a process to get to the results that will be different for each student. Now, moving into our next portion, there's an opportunity for you to engage in an equity self-assessment. Now, there are about 20 odd items that you can ask yourself and respond with the indication of yes or no, which will give you an opportunity to reflect on your current workspace and to really unpack, is my workspace equitable? And when we think about whether or not your workspace is equitable, we're really thinking about, am I tapping into the resources that are available for me to engage all of my learners? And I'm just going to read some of the questions that are there for our equity-based MTSS report card. We, as a staff, believe in all means all, and that each and every child should have a place in our school that is not segregated in any way. Does that really exist? Can you honestly allow yourself to be vulnerable and respond to that question? Next one, and I'll just read 3 of them. I, as an individual, recognize that all children can learn and that I have an action role in their learning. Number 3, I individually and we collectively actively examine whether all student groups represented in our community are part of our school. We ask ourselves, who is missing? And I'll just give you a quick anecdote. In my experience as a principal for a special education high school, there was opportunities to ask myself the same question. Who's missing from my cabinet? Who's not represented in my meetings? And holistically, what I was able to identify was that it was more important that I had every constituent category represented in my cabinet. So it went from all administrators, department chairs, a student representative, the nurse, the janitorial, a community representative who partnered with our school to ensure that within our circumference that our students were traveling to and from public and or school transportation. And so when we think of the inclusivity that is allotted to us when we're asking ourselves this question for transparency, we have to be willing to be vulnerable and honest. So as you are completing this on your own time, I want you to just really reflect with this tool and be able to fill in those gaps as to who's missing. So now we're going to start understanding, how do we build a solid foundation for MTSS? We know that you must have systems in this process that are grounded in research, theory, and evidence effectiveness. We can't make the assumption that we can just pull data based on, this idea that someone has. We have to look at our spaces and identify which area has a preponderance of evidence that will support the need for a system that all students can benefit from. That's that universal lens, okay? So in my experience, I've had the opportunity to realize that my cafeteria in the high school was the hub of all of the situations that were unfolding with my students and staff. And so I had to make a real-time change in my articulation of my why. I wanted my students to start the day off successfully. So I had to make a real-time change. I saw a vision for this, and I was able to provide the support that was necessary. And I had to get everyone invested into this process. And what I did was I ensured that all teaching assistants were in the cafeteria with our clinicians, and that our behavior support staff was also present to receive students when they arrived from the bus and or public transportation. They were greeted by staff on opposite ends of the buildings based on their means of transportation. They were tunneled into the cafeteria where they were greeted by TAs who sat and ate breakfast with them, and ultimately engage with them in conversation about, hey, it's good to see you in school, not the sarcasm of, hey, what are you doing here? I'm surprised you came today. That wasn't a universal positive approach to engaging our students. And so this particular why was the cafeteria so problematic? It was the lack of engagement from staff that were present during the same time with students. When I made this real-time change and I saw this vision and I shared it with everyone, of course there was pushback, because most people are of the mindset, I just want to congregate with my professional peer. I'm not really ready to talk to students. I haven't had my coffee yet. However, we are starting our day prior to 8 o'clock, and we need to be in the space to be able to receive students so that the start of their day is off to a good journey. And so the support that came from our clinicians and staff, from the buy-in of staff, allow students to arrive in a very safe, emotionally safe manner, and to experience the transition from cafeteria to the classroom to be more of a warm conversation on the way to start their day. And then they were greeted by the teacher at the door. And so this entire journey was spawned because I needed to answer the why. Why are my students starting their day off extremely rough? There was no engagement of love. There was no engagement of camaraderie and support in school culture and morale. When this shift happened, the why was answered, the vision was achieved, and we had success for students starting their day, and they were ready to engage in learning. So I want you to just think about how you can operationalize that experience in your own setting. So there's some elements of MTSS that supports us having a very strong foundation. And there are three important elements I just want to mention to you. These are that your practices and your lens contains evidence-based procedures, that you are setting an implementation of the process that's really solidified in research, again, and that you're utilizing local resources of various modalities. You're not just looking at one aspect of curricula, one aspect of clinical practice, one aspect of teaching and learning. You're considering various modalities to support the learning needs of all your students. There are also some components of equity-based frameworks that you want to ask yourself, are they present, again, and who's missing? You want it to be strong. You want strong and engaging leadership. You want someone that really can create the stature and appeal to your population. You want strong education support systems. You want inclusive academic instruction. You want to ensure that everyone is fully integrated into the organizational structure. You want to have trusting family relationships and partnerships. And you also want to ensure that your local education agency policies, frameworks are aligned to the practices that you are beginning to unfold in your MTSS setting. So sometimes these policies are coming from up top that may have to change because of the work that you're doing on the ground to make those real-time actionable items operationalized through MTSS. So there's a transformation of action that's going to take place when you do this. People are going to be bothered, and their feathers are going to be ruffled because you're really imbibing a change that is questioning someone's belief systems. And this is where the rubber meets the road. You want this transformation of action to be very supportive for all of your community school members. You want to design a system and a pathway of success. You want this to be the image that is pronounced throughout the entire building, where everyone can see the path of growth that we are making, that's based on numbers, that's based on visual goals that are attainable. And this is the emphasis that we're going to make on gathering the data to draw on multiple resources for support. So where there is a question as to why this is happening, you want to make sure, what data you have to ask yourself, what data do we have to support this why? And what could we do differently to transform this why into action that's successful for all students? All right. Now, again, you've seen this image, this upcoming image. This is our MTSS umbrella. This umbrella is just another depiction of all of the resources that are housed within our MTSS process. Just in demystifying some of the misconceptions, we have the RTI, which is a process within MTSS. You have PBIS, another process within MTSS. There are various programs that you can use in order to build your MTSS. But I want to reinforce this in our session today. You cannot bite off more than you can chew. You have to select the area where the student's behavior tells the largest narrative about the why. When you walk into your building and you ask, why are the hallways filled with students? Why does it take so long to transition? You want to start in the areas where you have the why, because the why is what's going to create the path for your journey of success. All right, so now we're going to apply some data across 3 tiers, as was mentioned in our objectives. And we begin by, again, always asking yourself and your team the following questions. What do we consider is universal support for all students? What resources are available and accessible for all students who need additional support? Are they ecumenical? Are we truly valuing our students to ensure that there's access to this support? How will data be used in the system? When we think of data, it's always people are, running from numbers because, fidelity and accountability is valued in the MTSS process. You don't want to make things up, because if your policies are not matching the behavior and a narrative of behavior of your students, there is disaggregated data. There is a dysfunction in that process. So policy reading one thing, hey, this is ideal, this is where we want to go, but your student's behavior is telling you something different. You have to now pause and say, there's a preponderance of evidence and our students, the narrative of our students' behavior that's telling us a different story. And we're asking ourselves why, and we're coming up with answers based on the narrative of the behavior of our students. Really important. You also want to consider, are the instructional, behavioral, and social supports current, and are they available? Culture within schools change on a regular basis, right? They change based on leadership. They change based on nuances with students. There are a lot of social, cultural, political implications within a school system that consist of variations of students' cultures that are meshed together to create one. So you also have to move with the time of students. And this is where you see that shift that has been made in implementing technology across content area, SEL across content area, looking at literacy across content area, because they're finding out many ways to touch students across content area as opposed to in isolation. So when you look at the data across tiers, you want to ensure that you're able to universally engage with students so that your decisions are made based on data. Now, another common, where are we? Here we go. Data routines across tiers. Students' data provides, again, this snapshot and gives us this reality check. We understand that the data is used to answer questions, and it also creates more questions, right? Now that you have this data, what you assume was the case is not the case, and now you have more questions. So the fact that you have questions to answer means that you're considering the needs of the students. There will be errors in your data. It exists. People are going to make mistakes. You have to decide what data you want to use, and it must make sense. And you also want to always conduct the equity checks. Are asking yourself those questions: who are we including and who are we missing? Now, there's another popular image, of course, that shows us the tiers, and we're going to go past this image for now. We know that we are looking at universal, targeted, and intense intervention, and some of the support that we consider to be universal, again, is in that question: what is academic, behavioral, and social emotional health of our students? How are we doing the big ideas or core competencies of the areas of study? Are we doing what we've agreed to be doing with universal support with fidelity? Are we? Or are we just going through the motions of it? On tier 2, which is additional support, who may need additional support and what areas of function? Are we doing what we've agreed to be doing with additional support? Are we executing our what, when, and how? So again, once you've documented your what and you have exemplified your why and you have a process in place, you may have to tweak it because the student's narrative is saying something completely different, which is really important. In our third tier, there we go, tier 3, which is intensified support. For whom is intensified support warranted? Is it for everybody who's expressing a need, or are we conducting those fidelity checks as students are progressing throughout tiers? And what areas are we focused on? Are we doing what we agreed to be doing with intensified support? And are we executing, again, our what, when, and how? All right. So there's some elements of data routines that are really important. It's in your ability to organize, process, and act. Again, looking at it from a systems approach with MTSS, we know that there's a process before there is a product. We are organizing your data based on the questions you really want to answer. Choose one area in a focus. Choose several whys. You want to organize prior to your actual meetings when engaging in conversations to implement this, to share your plan and your vision. You want to remember to use images and graphs. It really helps with depicting data. Consider tables and charts as numbers as well. In your process, you want to be open-minded to engage in a reflective process, meaning we're going to be vulnerable in this conversation about what we're doing, what we're not doing, and why. We want to focus on critical questions, which means not everyone around the table is going to agree, and that's okay. You want to consider the path you've traveled to arrive at this outcome. So being explicit, how did we get here? 5 years ago, with a different student population and a different set of staff, we were in a different place. So how did we get here? What's changed and what can we do differently to arrive at this successful outcome? And then you want to ensure that you're acting, right? You're acting, that your policies are meeting your procedures for those that you are supporting. Identify the team's strengths and areas of need. Your team strengths and areas of needs are extremely important. They are, from a strength-based approach, you want to ensure that you're tapping into the strengths of all of the parties that are involved in your process. You want to prioritize. You cannot focus on everything. I've tried it. Ready to have my sleeves rolled up and my blazer off. I'm very hands-on with engaging in policies and procedures. And you can see the bigger vision, right? But you have to remember that you have to start one foot at a time in ensuring that there's success along the way. When you can provide the resources for your team to be successful, you want to make sure that it's a visualization also of that success, that you can exemplify that we've made growth and this growth has had this particular impact with our student body. And as a result of this impact, we now have increased student attendance. as a result of increased student attendance, we now have more students engaged in instruction at the start of the day. These are small successes that are made from a giant why are our students being successful in a particular content area or with some of their SEL skills. So you also want to select and align your resources very intricately to each tier. And you want to look at it from an approach of itemizing, right? This behavior, this tier, these resources, and ask yourself, if they're working, we're going to continue. And if they're not working, we don't just want to have intervention that doesn't make sense. There are developmental intervention approaches, there are instructional intervention approaches, and then there's SEL and clinical interventions and approaches. You want to make sure that you are considering the various systems and departments of individuals that you have within your setting, because each person may have an answer to the why. And so this equitable opportunity to be vulnerable in a conversation to answer the why translate and transfers those whys into actions that support all students. All right, now let's get into our activities to promote a sense of belonging. So this image for me was a fun image to see because I was able to just really think about it from one of my loves, which is dancing, right? And so in this image, I'm gonna unpack some of the terminologies here as well. So when we think of diversity in this image, diversity is, for example, being invited to the party without having a chance, without having to chase the invite. That's diversity. Hey, you can come and you don't have to go, am I coming? Did they invite me? That's diversity. You got the invite, you don't have to chase it. Now you have inclusion, having the music to the dance and not being judged for your dance moves. In other words, the music is playing, I'm dancing, and I'm having a good time, and I don't feel judged in this experience. And then lastly, equity, being able to attend the dance without any barriers or access to issues. So now I arrive to the dance, and let's put it all together. I'm invited to this dance, I'm having a good time, and I'm not being stopped at the door to be asked, why are you here? We want our students to experience this sense of belonging in every aspect of their educational experience. This is their high school or elementary or middle school experience. This is where they belong. This is where their images and their energy and their experience will rest for X number of years with you. And you want to create that space where they feel safe and vulnerable to learn and be challenged to acquire new skills. So it's at the core of belonging is not just feeling a part, but this sense of ownership to the environment. And we help create that space when we see that there's opportunities to ask ourselves who's missing from that space, who else needs to be in this space. We have to be able to be honest and open about that question when we're looking about answers. And so as we're nearing the end, there are various opportunities throughout the course of a day to help students feel this sense of belonging. So you have things that can happen before the day. You may be doing some of these things. Again, I mentioned the meet and greet from arrival to the end of day, greeting students upon arrival and departure, really important. And I don't mean just saying hi, but hey, how was your day? How was yesterday? I noticed that you were on your way to class and you had papers in your hand. Were you able to submit those items? Really engaging in a meaningful way, not just to the students you know or like, or that you have an affinity to, but to all students, learning about them. Sometimes we only talk to the students that are boisterous, and those quiet students may be suffering in silence because we kind of miss them. And we have to ask ourselves, are we missing students that we don't see here? Breakfast clubs, morning assemblies, peer mentorship programs, and family drop-offs are all great times before the school day to engage with our students. And the next area of engagement is during the school day. And during the school day is the next slide. Yeah, I think it's coming up. During the school day, there are diverse student clubs. If there's not a club, but you know that there's a represented body or individual of students, you may begin to be an advocate of supporting students becoming advocates to start a club. So think about, hey, what club don't we have here? Because I know a student that, seems to be interested in this particular topic, could they join a club, or should we create a club? Inclusive classroom practices, which really is a matter of teachers encouraging this practice of validating diversity in the classroom. Student councils and leadership opportunities, cultural awareness days, and buddy systems, really tapping in to some of our introverted students to ensure that, hey, your voice matters, and I'll help voice it for you, because I'm going to be your buddy for, I may be your buddy for your 9th grade buddy, and perhaps it'll transfer into a friendship as they transition to 10th grade. But it's really important. In some settings, there are opportunities where, you have bridge programs where upper and lower grades are, meshed together so that they can invite them to the experience of the incoming grade, so that when they get there, they have someone to lean on to support them. And you build those bridges across grade levels so that there's continuity of the relationships and the sharing of resources that will help all students be successful. That's a flow of equity that is becoming very common in many schools. And after school flow is after school clubs and activities, homework support groups for all students, those that are across tiers, community service projects, parent and family engagement events, sports and recreational programs, even if it's not organized sports, just fun activities that students can do after school because they're on the grounds and it's permissible. Evening performances and exhibitions. Oftentimes what I've experienced is that there may be clubs that can be merged as a result of their number of participants. And so we've merged orchestra with band and with art and with dance club. And they've begun to, really bridge the gap for the diversity of services that are offered to all student clubs. And so what you'll see in the upcoming slides are additional resources that allow you to unpack the elements of a shared vision of equity and sense of belonging. So I provided you with some examples of properly written, poorly written examples, and then the tools to unpacking those examples. And so in our recap, we've gone down the path of cultivating inclusive excellence and integrating responsiveness across MTSS tiers. We showed how we can foster inclusivity by asking ourselves those questions that allow us to have a holistic approach to our responsiveness of MTSS. And we looked at building equitable foundations through collaborating with members of our professional learning community. Again, each of the slides have additional resources that give you templates and unpack each slide with more details that would allow you to really engage in the tools that are available to you to be successful. And I would like to thank you all for your participation. This is the beginning of a process that allows you to really question your own beliefs about the systems and experiences that you have. How do you know what you know? Do you really know what you know? And are you considering your why in your practice? Again, keeping in mind that equity is the access to resources for all students. And so thank you. As you begin to engage in having access to this content, I hope that it would allow you to really get a firm footing in the foundation of equity in MTSS.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cooper. That was a whirlwind journey through equity in education, along with some great practical examples. I loved hearing about your own experiences and putting some of these things into place. A lot of times we want to just kind of think pie in the sky about equity, but it really does come down to things like, how are you greeting your students in the morning? Who's getting attention? Who feels like they're part of a community in your school? And so I really loved hearing those examples. So we're waiting for some questions to see if any folks have anything that they'd like to share. But while we wait for that, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experiences as a principal, and if you could go back, what are some things now that you've had even more time to reflect on this that you might do differently, or things that you wish that you had been aware of when you were on the ground doing this work? Is there anything that comes to
I'm glad you asked that question, Trudy. One of the things that was a problem for me was wrapping my hands around so many things that needed to get done at the same time. And it's possible for me to train my team and do the work at the same time. It was, how do I build the plane while flying it? That was challenging. And so what I had to realize is that you have to train and delegate. And so what I did differently was that I had help from my LEA. My LEA, local educational agency, came in and provided training where I couldn't, to the team of designees for MTSS. And once everyone was trained, we then were starting from the same foot. And we were able to see the vision, and everyone could go off on their journey and come back and meet up and give feedback as to how are we doing with our why? Did we answer those questions? And it was great because it wasn't just my vision, it was our vision. And that was what I realized was necessary, that we had to create the space for people to learn about it.
Yeah, I love that. It was said in one of the sessions yesterday that this is not work that we can do by ourselves. We really need district resources and LEA resources to ask a principal to come in and be the one-stop shop for everything, for all the professional development, for all the coaching, for all the resources. It's just putting principals in an almost impossible situation. And so I love that you brought up the LEA. When I was doing this kind of work, I went to my LEA and I said, this is the kind of training that we need. We need it across all of these different campuses. Could you begin to offer this kind of training so that we have some consistent things? And when we get new teachers in, we can send them to you to get this training so that we're not trying to provide it all just by ourselves. So if you can lean on your district and lean on your LEA, boy, that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think Jasmine put in the question. She says, Dr. Cooper, reflect on the need for standardized data to make good decisions for students. Does this practice contradict equity practices? I want to say no, that it doesn't. What happens with standardized data is that it's aggregated to speak to what is considered norm reference, right? When it's aggregated in norm reference, we're speaking to a preponderance of evidence that supports a particular need. It doesn't exclude anyone else. It just identifies who in preponderance, who mostly has the need. And so that's where you then begin to say, well, is this now a universal approach? Because most of our students need it. That then denotes that this could be universal for all students. And then those students that are not part of that preponderance, you then can consider whether it's a targeted or intense intervention. And that's the true essence of equity, that you're able to disaggregate the needs of students across multiple tiers.
Boy, I want to stand up and cheer at that answer. I'm a school psychologist. So, the importance of having a set standard that you're measuring gives you the ability to say, these are the students who need
this is
more
normal, right? This is what we need.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
right.
It was funny, Trudy. Sometimes schools bucket everything into, this universal approach. But when you look deeper at the data and at the narrative, one thing I realized was that I had a lot of teachers that were doing a lot of tier 1 referrals for discipline. And I said, why do we have this stack of tier 1s? I said, let's not do it electronically because, it's too quick to push the button. If you have to write this out, you have to think about what you're doing when you're making this referral. What I found out was that most of my tier 1 referrals for discipline was really a lack of classroom management training for teachers. And so it allowed me to go back and say, hey, this data means something. Why do we have so many? And let's unpack the meaning of this. What could you do differently to prevent this, right? What can you do differently to support positive behavior? Why? When I got the question of why, I realized, hey, we need to provide training. And so I had a team come in to do what? Classroom management training. So now not only were you arriving to a safe space, students being greeted by staff upon entry and down the hall and to your door, and now when you're engaging in instruction, guess what? You have less behavior issues because your teacher also has a relationship with you, so the behavior becomes manageable. no longer referral one. So I decreased the number one referrals significantly in the quarter because we found out the need. Why did we have them? Lack of training on classroom management.
You're looking at the why behind the data, right?
Absolutely.
The data is what the data is. So let's take a look at the why that's underneath what that data is telling us. So
yes,
what a great answer. What a great answer. All right. Are there any final questions? We've got just a minute more until we need to let Dr. Cooper go. What a fantastic presentation. Just love this. So many great resources. You're going to notice that we have the PDF of the slides pinned to the top of your chat. So if you haven't seen that, you'll be able to grab that. That has all of those resources that we were sharing along the way. We'll have you'll be able to access those. There's a lot of great lists and checklists and things in there that are really helpful for you as you think this through. I'm not seeing any other last minute questions. Well, this was a wonderful session. We really thank you, Dr. Cooper, for bringing your experience, sharing it with us. We at Branching Minds really appreciate you and your approach. So glad that you could be with us today. Let's show Dr. Cooper a little love in the chat. And thank you so much for being with us today. Lots and lots of thank yous. And even with our technical challenges, boy, we got through it. So it was wonderful.
We did. Thank you. Shout out to the tech team.
Yeah, that's right. And to Maureen, who is running this summit and doing such a great job. We're really grateful. So thanks, everybody. And we will see you soon for another session. And yeah, thanks for joining us. And thanks again, Dr. Cooper.
You're welcome.
Great.
Thank you.
I'll have this session with you. Thanks. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.